I forget if push catch is something that could be used by almost anyone, just as, hey, this is probably a smart thing to do, or if it's more specific for certain protocols. Let's touch on what actually is that and then who is it for?
Yeah. So the push catch, the original push catch was two products. One product was called liver sauce. Liver sauce is a herbal formula with some other nutraceuticals in it, things like quercetin and luteolin. It's got bitter herbs in it. It's got arlopoic acid. And so it's designed to really stimulate the bile flow. Remember, that's my jam, was the bile, right? So the bitters are really getting the bile to start moving. All the other aspects are supporting other pieces of detoxification with the enzymes and things like that. So that's going to be your push. You're going to be mobilizing and pushing. And then the ultra binder was the catch. So it's a combination of charcoal and zeolite and so some other binding agents. And as the bile dumps into the gut, the binder's there to hold on to those toxins. The toxins don't move unless the bile moves. So they're coupled together. And that's extremely important to remember. You're not getting toxins out if the bile's not moving. And so once the bile is moving, it's into the GI system, and then that's where you do the binding. So that's the overall philosophy that Quicksilver has. We got to push and we got to catch. And then how we do that varies person to person. I do think almost anyone could benefit from the push catch protocol because we all need some of that support. Now, there are people that are really sensitive, and if you do that too quickly, they can be a little bit out of sorts from it initially, but it doesn't last long. If it does happen, usually it may be a day, maybe two. Rarely does it go more than that in my experience. And then, yeah, then people feel pretty good.
Yeah, I was a little sensitive back then. I was also trying multiple things. Like I was throwing in
Yeah.
biocide and at the same time. So I was just like, all
Mhm.
right, let's see what can happen. And
Put everything
uh,
in. Yeah.
yes,
Mhm.
initially backfired, but then everything worked out fine.
Yeah.
And to your point, because you started this whole thing with bile, and that's clearly one of your passions. So always fun being in the functional medicine space and hearing the nerdy passions that we all have. And for you, it's bile. So with that said, though, it is important because if you just start pushing stuff, almost anyone can start killing off things or pushing things, but your body's still going to have to deal with that if you do not offer that support. And
Yeah.
that doesn't feel so great. So even what you're talking about there, if someone was to feel a little off, even for, let's say, only 24 to 48 hours, fundamentally what you're dealing with is this overload of
Right.
a burden that the body's not able to fully
Yeah.
deal with, perhaps even with support. For me, I didn't know this, and I would never even remotely allude to who she is. It was just a naturopathic doctor that lived locally to me at one point when I lived in Pennsylvania. And this woman started me off on Alamax, that
Mm.
garlic supplement brand, and there was no binder to it. We really didn't do a ton of lab testing. We did one thing that didn't even show the thing that she thought it was going to be. And Dr. Matt, within 3 days, I had the most unbelievable vertigo I had almost ever had in my life.
Wow.
And that was coming from someone who was diagnosed with Meniere's disease at one point, just so you know.
Yeah.
So this is a separate vertigo. I head spinning for hours, could
Mm.
not get this under control. Just eventually had to take something to fall asleep because it was that bad. And so when people do not think about this catching side, whether it's
Right.
literally with you guys or just figuratively with something else, you have to do this because there's a lot of clients out there that I think are
Yeah.
probably, correct me if I'm wrong, in your 23 years, would you also say that they're more sensitive than ever before? Is that something that you're seeing too?
Yeah, definitely. I think people are very sensitive, and these toxins and just these mechanisms often are so blocked up and not working well that as soon as you start like moving stuff and pushing, it's whoa, what's happening here? I haven't experienced a lot of this before. And it's uncomfortable. People can get headaches, they can get vertigo, they can get diarrhea, they can all these things. And how do we mitigate that so they're not miserable? Because they're going to know that you're not making them sicker. Obviously, that's not your goal. Your goal is not to make people feel worse, even though you don't know until you start these processes. And I think having a system in place like the push catch model, something that's going to mitigate those binders do mitigate a lot of those reactions. And often you just got to go slower too. If you go too fast too quickly, people don't feel very good. But you can't go too slow for too long either, because then you're just treading water. And you're not moving the needle at all. I don't want people to be afraid of anything with Quicksilver. It's people do great with it. You just have to know your limits with certain things at the beginning and then just expand it from there.
Yeah,
Um,
and to be clear here, and Absolutely love the folks at Biobotanicals, but yes, this was more of a bio side and detox. That's a
Yeah,
rough little supplement they
it
got there.
can be. It can
But you
be.
can
Yeah.
always adjust. Even looking back, I wish I did this at 21, Dr. Matt. So I only got up to 1 drop 3 times a day before I had the flu,
Mhm.
basically. Get
Yeah.
well, even okay, cool. Back off, and then you know what? Be extreme. Do 1 drop once a
Mhm.
day, every other day. Cool. Did I
Yeah.
make it a week of doing that? Awesome. Now we're gonna
Yeah.
do maybe 2 drop or whatever. But you
Yeah.
can always go slower, and you just like you said, you have to put that progression in. Otherwise, it'd be like going into the weight room and doing the same weight for the same
Right.
reps every time. At some point, you gotta up the reps or gotta up the weight a little bit.
Yep.
What would people expect if they're doing this? Is this something that you'd recommend people do once a year? Is this something that they
Mhm.
need to be doing twice a year? Because obviously, if they're going to get the toxins back, I'm assuming this isn't going to permanently fix something, even if it can make them feel the best that they felt in years. So, what does a typical recommended like protocol look like with this push catch
Mhm.
thing?
Yeah, that's obviously gonna vary person to person, but generally speaking, I would say that I mean, I like to start people on probably a good 3-month kind of approach where focus for about 3 months on a protocol that does what we're just describing, that does push and catch and removing some obstacles and really seeing where we get from that and working with other pieces as we need, but that's our core foundation. Once we do that, most people get to a point where we can maintain that for a while, maintain it with a much smaller amount of things. So, for example, I often will switch people off of liver sauce after a while onto just bitter herbs
Okay.
because now that they've done this upregulation of all these enzymes, it should be working a little bit better. Now we just got to keep the bile moving because bitter herbs keep the bile flow going. So I work with that a lot. But then I would say maybe at least once a year doing something fairly targeted and significant like that, maybe for a month. There are people that I think benefit from doing something quarterly, but for the most part, I would say once, maybe twice a year for most people
That's cool. I
would
mean,
would be good.
small price to pay considering the world that we're living in. I almost said liver. That's
Yeah.
funny. But living in, if that's, I'm not saying that's just it. Of course, you guys got to adjust your whole lifestyle, sleep at
Right.
odd times compared to the average American, maybe wear some blue light blocking glasses, catch sunlight, weight lift, eat well, just
Mhm.
basic stuff. But if you do all of that, you'll probably feel a lot better. What else
Mhm.
do they need to know about some of the stuff with Quicksilver? I know we wanted to talk about metals today as well, and that's probably a multi-series podcast to cover everything that we could with metals, but I would like to make sure we at least touched on it. So I'm sure
Oh, yeah.
push catch would be useful for something like that. Is there anything else that you typically look at or recommend when it comes to metal toxicity?
Metals, yeah. Yeah, 2 main things I would say with metals in Quicksilver's protocols. One is glutathione. Glutathione is the antioxidant that does the conjugation to metals. So in the liver, the enzymes that are doing that detoxification are the ones around glutathione. So you need to have adequate glutathione. And we know that the more glutathione that this body has, the easier it is to keep moving the metals out. The challenge with metals is that they deplete the glutathione. So you're in a sort of a tough spot, right? You need the glutathione to get rid of the metals, but the metals are depleting your glutathione. So how do you get back on that, the proper recycling of the glutathione and all that? You need to have often some added support, at least initially, to get that moving. So yeah, that would that's really one of the biggest pieces. And then the other piece is when we're talking about the catch part of it, there's a metal binder that we have called IMD, which stands for intestinal metal detox. And it's a specific binder for mercury, for arsenic, for cadmium. It has affinity for antimony and nickel. It doesn't have a lot of affinity for lead, so you need some other binder. EDTA is needed for lead. Things like aluminum and some of these other more little harder to bind up, honestly. So that could be a little trickier. I We don't have a really great aluminum binder, unfortunately, at the moment. Silica does seem to do it. So BioSil and some of these other silica products will help with that. So I know a lot of people are really worried about aluminum. And it's a hard one to test for. It's a hard one to detox, to know exactly how well you're detoxing it as well.